I'd next like to talk about the relationship between guards and inmates. And it's a unique relationship. It can be a very strained relationship. Now, I will tell you that in my experience, and I think as Victor suggests, there you can have a relationship with a guard, with a correctional officer as an inmate in prison. But you walk a very fine line, and there are cost benefit analyses involved with those relationships. Let me give you an example. To be friendly to a correctional officer at first blush may seem like a dangerous proposition. What you never want is for other inmates in prison, and this is typical across the board among all institutions, to believe that you're a quote snitch, to believe that you're someone who is quote in bed with correctional officers, that you report to them, that you give them any information regarding who's doing what things are going on a cell block that may not be according to institutional rules. Then again, it's often very beneficial for an inmate to keep a guard close, to keep a friendly relationship with a guard, so long as that's not perceived as a relationship that could damage other inmates. So what I mean by that is that relationship has to benefit inmates, has to benefit the inmate having the relationship. Those are typically the relationships that I saw and that Victor describes in state prisons. So for instance, if you are living on a cell block and you typically are friendly with a guard or a correctional officer, if that guard, that correctional officer, allows you 10 more minutes in the shower, or allows you an extra towel, or allows you to pick what cell you'd like to live in when it comes time to move cells, well, that's a benefit to you to be nice to and to be cordial to that guard or that correctional officer. What you don't want is to be perceived as being too close to that correctional officer. You don't want to be seen having private conversations with that correctional officer. So this is the relationship, this is how these relationships work. You walk a very fine line, and at any moment in an institution where there is violence, where there is an inmate culture where you don't talk to guards, you run the risk, if you're seen having a relationship with a guard or correction officer, as being a snitch, and violence can then follow. Now, guards vary. Correctional personnel vary. Uh, we had a term, and Victor talks about this at one point, the 8 and skate guards, the 8 and skate correctional officers. Those are correctional officers who come to work, do their 8 hours, and go home. They are less concerned with petty infractions and more concerned about more significant infractions that may occur. So, for instance, they're not going to look the other way if they see an inmate hiding a shank or assaulting another inmate, but they may look the other way if they see a minor infraction, say betting a pack of cigarettes on a card game. And I'll share with you an example from my time in prison. I was on a cell block at one point, and there was a relationship between a correctional officer and an inmate. And that correctional officer would look the other way. That inmate worked in the kitchen, and he would look the other way when that inmate came to the cell block, because every night that inmate brought 2 sandwiches, which is an infraction. You can't take food out of the dining hall. 2 sandwiches to the cell block. He would give one to the correctional officer working in the bubble or working in the control room and would take the other to his cell, eat, and go to bed. And this relationship lasted for years. At one point, that correctional officer had the day off, wasn't in the pod, wasn't in the bubble. And a younger inmate, fresh out of the academy, the correctional officer training academy, was working the bubble. He patted this inmate down and found the sandwiches, ordered him to go to his cell for lockup, and wrote him up. That inmate eventually had to be extracted from the cell and assaulted several guards. Now the question here is, what's better? Do minor infractions need to be enforced in a state prison to maintain order? Or do 8 and skate guards get the job done? Is that the way an institution ought to be policed? Should minor infractions be overlooked and only major infractions be addressed? Or was this new guard, was this new correctional officer right in how he handled the situation? Which, again, eventually turned violent and eventually cost this inmate his parole and some more time. But these are differing philosophies about how institutions need to be run. If we don't police the small things, do the big things follow anyway? And this is something I'd like you to discuss in the discussion board this week. The final topic I'd like to discuss this week is the prison economy. Now, the prison economy grows typically out of an institution's lack of being able to give inmates what they need. So if the food is substandard, if the laundry system doesn't function according to the way it's supposed to, well, then an underground economy comes to light. And how the underground economy works is it's quite simple. There are inmates that work jobs inside a prison, work at the chow hall, work at the laundry, work at the school. For instance, I worked at the school. And other inmates will pay these inmates for certain privileges that inmates who don't pay won't get. So Victor gives a perfect example of how this underground economy works. For a few packs of cigarettes, typically the currency in a large state prison, if they allow smoking, if they don't, typically it's sweets or other food items. For some food items or a pack of cigarettes, I used to be able to, and Victor talks about this, be able to get my laundry done. For an extra pack, so instead of 1, 2, I could get my whites, my t-shirts, my thermals bleached. Normal inmates, inmates who weren't involved in paying for their laundry, couldn't get this done. And in many instances, normal inmates who turned their laundry in on a typical cycle didn't get their laundry back in a timely fashion, if ever sometimes. And the inmates who worked in the laundry had an incentive to lose laundry that wasn't paid for. What that does is it gives rise to new business. Those who lost their laundry decide, well, I should pay then, so I know it's coming back, and so I know it gets bleached. And that's how the economy grows, and that's how it works. There's also an economy for illegal narcotics. And there's an economy for other things from the street, other items from the street, for instance, cell phones, steroids, creatine, things you cannot get inside a state prison typically, that involves smuggling, that involves contraband and how it comes in. Now, as you may not be surprised to learn, in my experience, much of the contraband at my state prison came in through correctional officers, came in through guards who were being paid. It can also come in through the visit room, where a visitor will stash it in their pants, stash it in a body cavity, bring it in and give it to the inmate during the visit. Now, that's a more difficult proposition because inmates are typically strip searched before and after every visit, but it can happen. In terms of correctional officers, the scheme is quite simple. An inmate would have a family member send that correctional officer or guard money outside of the prison channels. Send it directly to their checking account. Send them a personal check. And then that correctional officer, that guard, brought in whatever it is that inmate paid for. Now, again, this is a risky proposition for a correctional officer. And this is one of those benefits that an inmate might derive from having a close relationship with a correctional officer. But it's risky. In my experience, I saw several correctional officers who had random searches on their way into the prison. They got shook down and they found contraband. And they lost their jobs, and they can face criminal charges for that. So the underground economy can flourish, and it typically flourishes in institutions that can't serve inmate needs. And as we go on throughout the course, you're going to hear more about the prison economy. You're going to hear me talk about it a little more, and you're going to read a little bit more about it, and we'll discuss exactly sort of the dynamics about it. We may discuss food in prison, or we will discuss food in prison. We're also going to discuss gambling. And when we do, the prison economy again comes back into light. Packs of cigarettes, sweets, those are the currency inside prison. I'm interested to hear your thoughts about prison economies and what you know about them from popular media outlets or also maybe from personal experience.